Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us as we continue our countdown towards the big day. And Don, you've covered an awful lot of these now. Do you still get the same excitement for the playoffs as you did the first time you covered them, whenever that was?
Well, you'll probably remember the first one I ever did was Derby County against West Bromwich Albion. I assume you were both there. So
I unfortunately was there as well, Don.
Yes, you were there as well, weren't you? Yeah. That was the first mugging I saw at a playoff final, but it certainly wasn't the last. Well, Derby were involved in the biggest one when QPR managed to beat you. So no, but look, joking aside, they are special occasions. I personally think the playoffs have been the greatest invention in the sport, and I absolutely love them.
Here. You won't get any disagreements from us. Justin, here's a question for you. How many playoff final appearances do you think Curtis Davies has made?
I want to say, off the top of my head, being a championship expert, I will say 3 off the top of my head.
Don, how many do you reckon?
I would concur.
Curtis?
It's only 1. I was injured for the other 2.
Yeah.
I broke my foot. So unfortunately, I broke my foot in the March for the West Brom Derby one. If not, obviously, clearly West Brom would have won. So I unfortunately missed the first ever game at Wembley with England under 21s, and I missed the playoff final. And then for the Aston Villa Derby final, I'd ruptured my Achilles in the November, so I was out for that one as well. But the one I did play in, I won.
How many playoff finals should you have played? Me and you were right, Justin.
That's what I was aiming for anyway. Yeah, absolutely.
Don't let him change your question, Ryan. You were right, mate. Don't worry. So.
I just could not believe it when I read that. I assumed you had loads under your belt because you had 2 other playoffs where you didn't get to the final, but then you had the 2 which you mentioned there where you should have played but didn't. I could not believe that.
Yeah, been involved. Well, the clubs I've been involved. The clubs I've been involved in 5 playoff campaigns. With Birmingham, with Derby, with Hull, and Hull was the only one where I made the final and played in a final. And the Army Day. Still a fond memory in my head.
100% record, Curtis. 100% record. That's what you should have been saying. But do you agree with Don? The playoffs, the greatest invention the football has ever seen?
Yeah, it's amazing. Listen, we work on it and we get the joy of being there and seeing the day, and you get fan reactions from both sides, especially when you're a neutral. You can actually just enjoy the day, enjoy the game, enjoy the occasion. Whereas a lot of fans go down there to enjoy the day, enjoy the occasion. But if the game doesn't go their way, it changes the whole mood, going all the way back to wherever they're from. It changes everything. So I think it's really a lovely day, yes, but it's only lovely if you go and win it. And as a player, that was always my thing. It's all good, and getting this day out for the fans, that's brilliant. But the goal isn't Wembley. I've always said the goal is whatever league you're stepping up into, be it from League 2 into League 1 or League 1 to the champ to Prem. You've got to go and win the game to make it special.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the game itself, because we're still a few days away from the final. But Don, what will be going through the minds of the players in the day before? We're doing this on the Tuesday, but what will players be thinking now when they've still got a fair bit to go?
Yeah, I think they'll be playing how they'd like the game to go in their head, and they'll have an idea, or they'll be trying to work out who they're going to be spending most of their time up against, and trying to remember the positive experiences, So if you're, for example, Wilson Isidore running past Ahmed Hodzic at the Stadium of Light, I should think you'd be focusing on things like that. And if you're Sheffield United, vice versa, the positive elements that you played. But I don't. I think players, Curtis will know this. Players handle big games in very, very different ways. Some are very relaxed. I've seen people throw up. I won't name names. I've seen people, back when I played, have a tot of whiskey. I've seen people go outside for a cigarette. Honestly, they just handle it in so many different ways. I mean, personally, I was never one of a nervous disposition. After I'd probably played 10 or 15 professional games, I never really got that nervous about games and occasions. But there are lads out there that do. But the focus will be on the game plan, their individual duels. And I don't think any of them will be even contemplating what it'll feel like if they lose.
I think it's really interesting what Don says there about players handling in different ways. You have such a build-up, and we talk about the gap between the second leg and the final. it's that second leg in the final. You've got that build-up of time, but you've also got the logistics of you've got to sort your tickets. You've got to get all your tickets for your friends. You're doing 25 tickets, using all of them. Who's having my Club Wembley tickets? Who's having this? Who's having that? So you've got all of that to deal with. And there's actually a game still to go on. So it is mad. And then depending on what city you live in, if you live in a one-team city, like living in Hull, for instance, you know, everyone is like, oh, we got to win. So you can't avoid having it. So if you're of a nervous disposition, then you're probably better off staying at home and just like, you know, being calm in your own domain. But if not, you're going to be reminded this big game is coming up. And I think it's how you handle the occasion when you get there. For instance, when we went there with Hull, we went there because of our expectations of ourselves. We went there in tracksuits. We went out and saw the pitch. We went in a changing room. We got the game done. We won the game. We went home because we just knew we had to get back up. Whereas Sheffield Wednesday turned up. They were there in their nice suits, which isn't a problem. It's Wembley game. You know, it's a big occasion. Sunglasses on, taking selfies on the pitch. I went in the change room. I said, lads, we've got this. They're here for the day out. We're here to win. And that was kind of a big motivation in what I said and what I say. And I think that's kind of, listen, it's all as players, you might, if it went the other way, I might have been like wrong, of course, you know, like, but it's just, you kind of sense certain things where the underdog sometimes is more happy to be there. Whereas as a team that had just been relegated, we knew we had to go and win. And fortunately for us, we had Mo Diarmi with that wonder strike against Sheffield Wednesday.
I got some research for you fellas now. You've got to go back and find out how many playoff final winners wore suits and then let Curtis know.
It's going to be a lot of work finding that out.
It was the sunglasses I was annoyed about.
It is an interesting point, to be fair, but expanding on that, Curtis, with a game like this where the stakes are so high, do players think about what happens if they don't win? Obviously, you've been a part of a team or a group that has won and obviously has tasted defeat as well.
So in terms of on the day, you're only thinking about winning. You don't think about what happens if it's just basically you can't, me as a player anyway, you don't envisage losing. You don't envisage losing. Even when, you know, going into, it's totally different, but going into the FA Cup final against Arsenal, if you go in there expecting to lose, you're probably going to lose. So even though they're a much better team than us and they end up winning the game, you've got to go there believing you can win. You've got to have that mindset of being on the front foot. So that's what we did. And then ultimately there's a contingency plan afterwards that, yes, it comes into play after, but if it's a forefront of your mind before going into that game, then yeah, I feel the distraction would be a little bit too much. But, you know, for instance, when you talk about Hull, you're talking about the likes of players potentially leaving if you don't go up, or maybe wanting out, or maybe the club having to sell certain players because you've not gone up. And then the other side with West Brom, I was injured for it, so it's a little bit not detached because it's my team, and obviously I wanted us to get promoted, but I didn't have that emotional feel for coming off of the pitch, having lost a game, having spent 90 minutes of my energy into the game. So it was a really strange thing for me because I wanted to get up with West Brom. I wanted to play in the Premier League West Brom. But I was in a position where I'd had conversations at the start of the season that if we don't go up, I'll be allowed to leave. So whilst I wasn't celebrating the fact that we'd lost, in my head, it was kind of like a weird space where we've lost the game. I'm disappointed for the club. I'm disappointed for my teammates, disappointed everything. And then there's a side of you that later on, when all the dust has settled, you're like, almost, it's a selfish thing in football, but I'll be all right. And that's the way that, unfortunately, like that's the game. You know, there's certain players that are going to be good enough that they can make the step up without that club, and clubs are going to be wanting them. And also, there's clubs that can't afford to keep these players and they have to sell. You know, for instance,
I was going to say, I suspect that there'll be several players on each side that will have that same feeling, because there's several players on both sides that I think will go on with respect to bigger and better things. So, but no, it is an interesting one because your sole focus has to be on winning the game of football. You can't even contemplate losing. You deal with losing afterwards, as Curtis just said.
Don, Sheffield United, they're obviously the favourites with the bookies to win. And with that being said, based off what you've seen of them this season, the fact they finished third, several points ahead of Sunderland, and how they did in the actual playoff semis, that's difficult to argue with, isn't it, would you say?
Yes, I think very generically. I think there's probably three ways you can look at it. You can look at the fact that Sheffield United were clearly by a streak the third best team in the league. You can look at the two games that they had between each other in the Championship, and I think most people would agree Sunderland were the better team overall in the two games. Or you can look at they're both playing very differently now to when they were when they played those two games, which were in the middle of winter, December and January. I think they're both probably going to line up in different formations. And of course, there are other stakes to throw in it. I personally, I've listened to a lot of people very, very comfortable with saying Sheffield United will win this game. I would be less inclined to be as strong on that, although they do go in as favourites. I just think when you look at the semi-finals and the opponents of both, Sunderland are a hugely different proposition to Bristol City in those forward areas with Mayenda, Isidore, Mundell, will he play? You know, they've got real pace and running, dribbling power that we've already seen hurt Sheffield United this season. So can Sunderland get those players in those areas where they can hurt those central defenders who have been hurt by them before? The flip side is on Sheffield United so that they're going to be playing a very different team to Bristol City, and Sunderland are going to be playing a very different team to Coventry. Coventry are not the same opponent. You know, Coventry wanted to dominate possession probably more than Sheffield United will want to. If Sheffield United play Kiefer Moore, you suspect they'll go a little bit more direct than Coventry went. So I don't envisage Sheffield United having, 65, 70% of the ball at Wembley. So there are so many different ways that it could go. And they've both got players of real quality that can hurt the opposition. And so I'm absolutely fascinated with the tactical battle, the formations they're going to play, the personnel they're going to play, and how it goes, really. But I wouldn't have too much between these two teams.
Just expanding on Sheffield United a little bit more, Curtis, given that we've seen such a good sort of, I'd say 2/3 of the season, bit of a mini implosion just after the international break. What have you made of Sheffield United this season as well?
Yeah, I think they've been fantastic. I thought early on in the season it would be them and Leeds, if I'm being totally honest. I thought Burnley, obviously, very strong team, very good team, but I felt Burnley were so focused on the defensive side, they lost a little bit of that attacking angle that when a game is tight, they wouldn't go for the throat. Whereas Chris Wilder has always been the same way. He'd rather lose going for 3 points than let a game just fizzle out. And that's his substitutions, if it's 0-0 or a draw, will always be to go and win a game. So we know that from him. But it is ultimately, you summed it up there. It was just that mini implosion that cost them. 1 week where they lost 3 games. That cost them. Literally, we did the game, the Leeds game, where basically it put the ball into Sheffield United's hands. And then you're expecting, a 3-game week for Sheffield United, 3, in my opinion, winnable games. And they lost all 3. So it was crazy that, and listen, us pundits don't know what we're talking about sometimes. But the 3 games, you look at them, it's like, well, this time next week, Sheffield United will be, because we did the Plymouth game, which was the 3rd game they lost. You're expecting them that to be the game where they've secured their top spot, and it looks like they're going to run away with it. They lose those 3 games, and all of a sudden, it's just everything. Just your whole planning, I think, goes out the window. It's not to say they thought they'd cracked it, because the 3 teams were all so close, and it was going to go down to the wire. But in terms of the contingency plan of the way you have to then manage the team, manage the group, you're now thinking about an extra couple of games, how you manage them mentally, how that come down from potentially being in the top 2 or even winning the league to now, actually, we've got there, but we've fallen at the last hurdle and we now need to go into playoffs. And I go back to my experience with Hull. We finished in 5th that year. I believe Derby finished 4th. We finished 5th. And with that, Brighton finished, I think, in 3rd, and they lost out on the last day. So it was a head-to-head with Middlesbrough, and Burnley were playing elsewhere. meaning but Borough were going to be okay, they were going to go up, but the head-to-head with Middlesbrough meant, whoever basically wins this game is going to go up. But Middlesbrough had the better goal difference, so Middlesbrough were above them. They draw with Middlesbrough that day and end up being 90 points, whatever it was, and missing out by goal difference. And then all of a sudden they play Sheffield Wednesday team who finished, I think, 16 points behind them. And then they lose the 2 legs, and then we go and beat Sheffield Wednesday in the final. And that just shows the psychology of it, of them losing on literally the last day, the last moments, compared to, at least this time, Sheffield United have had, unfortunately for them, but 2 games where they kind of had their heads around it. And I think going into the final, a big thing for me is I always think the lack of emotion in their semi-final will put them in good stead. I know that sounds silly, but the fact that they were comfortable winners in the first leg meant that all the hype around the second game, not that it's sewn up, but it pretty much is. So they're a bit calmer about the game, approach the game really well, go and win that 3-0 again. So there was no outpouring of emotional energy. Fans weren't running on the pitch celebrating the fact that they've got to Wembley. They got the job done. Whereas we flipped that to Sunderland's side, where Sunderland were pretty much the underdogs for most of the time in terms of the way they played. Coventry were the better team, but Sunderland were clinical, and they pretty much only played. The only time they took the game to Coventry was in extra time. And then with that, still, it goes to extra time. They get for extra time. You think it's going to penalties, and they score a 120 plus 2-minute goal that sends them through. Obviously, everyone's running all over. Everyone's emotional, celebrating with the crowd. And I'm not saying that takes away. You have to enjoy those moments, but it makes it more about getting there than actually the prize at the end sometimes. And I don't get me wrong, I think Regis Lebris will be doing all he can to bring them back down to earth over this week and making sure that they're focused on the prize of the Premier League. But I feel like the Sheffield United way of doing it was a lot more comfortable and a lot more mind-focused.
If you're Sunderland, you can flip that on its head, can't you? You can say it's written in the stars.
Yeah.
Because things like that don't happen. I mean, it was just bonkers on the night that Dan Ballard would somehow squeeze that ball into that net. So, and in that, it was actually said extra time. It was the second half of extra time. I had a look at the numbers today, and I nearly fell off my chair because I hadn't realised it at the time. But Sunderland went from having 30% of the ball in normal time and the first part of extra time to having 70-odd% of it in the second period of extra time. Now, I hadn't realised that on the night. I knew that they were more on the front foot, but they had half a dozen shots, 2 big chances according to Opta stats and so on and so forth. And they got it over the line. So just to play devil's advocate with your point, Curtis, if you're Sunderland, you can really flip that and make that a real positive rather than that emotional draining because of the gap that there is to recover, train, go again. I think you can flip that as a positive and say, listen, written in the stars.
I'll double devil's advocate there.
Here we go.
Because I think that gap means they haven't got that kind of that high. Whereas if they come from Monday and the game straight away on Saturday, then I think, it's more likely to be in their system still. I'm trying to say in terms of, the Tuesday the game was.
Devil's advocate and say, because Sheffield United knew that they had the playoff place secured for 2 games, bloody Sunderland have had it secured for 3 months, haven't they? So,
well, they've had fourth secured for 3 months, haven't they? So, it's been a bit crazy. But, we're all just double guessing each other. We don't know what's going to happen. We like to pretend we know. But ultimately, we don't know what Sunderland we're going to see. We don't know what Sheffield United we see. But we know that Sunderland don't have to be the best team to go and win the game. That's big strength in their team. And the young legs they've got and the energy that they've got in the team, they've been brilliant this season.
But the best team in the whole of the championship at not being the best team and winning the whole season, not just in isolation, Sheffield United. And that's where Chris Wilder had his little thing. I don't care what your data says. We just win. Remember that little rant that Chris had?
Yeah.
And he was right, except for that 1 week in April where they didn't win, when they probably were expected to win. So there's so much at play here. It is just going to be fascinating.
Don, one thing I wanted to ask you quickly about, and I'm a very bitter man, you see, and I don't forget these kind of things. So After the first leg of the playoff semi-final between Sheffield United and Bristol City, obviously there was the controversial red card. We went on record afterwards of saying, I don't think that was a red card. And at the time, I believe you on the co-coms also said you didn't believe it was a red card at the time, but we got massive blowback afterwards. So I just wanted to put it out there very quickly. Do you think it was, or?
So technically by the letter of the law, yes. I just didn't think there'd been an uproar if the referee on the night had given a penalty and a yellow card because he saw him have that last swipe in an attempt to play the ball. I thought he could have got away with it. I don't think anybody would say, unlike the FA Cup final, for instance, with Dean Henry, that's a massive blunder. You know, I don't think anybody would have said it's a massive blunder. It would have been debated. But I was being a little bit selfish, Ryan, if I'm honest, because I knew at that moment that as a contest, that whole tie was over. And I was just glad I was on the second leg of Sunderland Coventry rather than the second leg of Sheffield United Bristol City. So there was probably a selfish angle in it. So I can see both sides. Joby and the lads, Troy, they were adamant it was a straight red. And I get it by the letter of the law. If you look at the pull first, you could say not attempting to play the ball. But I just thought, and I said that because I talk with Kevin Friend at the PGMOL and some of the referees and things like that. I said, I completely get it. And by the letter of the law, the decision wasn't wrong. But selfishly, I wanted a penalty and a yellow card.
Quickly, Curtis, as a defender making that recovery tackle, are you annoyed at getting sent off for that?
No, it's a red card. Like I said,
Curtis, you're a defender. You're part of the defenders union.
No. I'm part of the defenders union when I believe, we see red cards sometimes now where people make tackles, they win the ball, they can't stop their follow through because of momentum, and they catch a player and then they get sent off. So sometimes with those ones, I could be sympathetic and stuff like that. But with this, the action of pulling him is the foul, not the fact that he taps the ball once he's already fallen over. So that's why I do believe it's a red card. I'm not saying, listen, it's an emotional game. It's last ditch, and you're not ever planning for that scenario. But me and Dom were speaking about this yesterday. We were like, well, could he have just let him shoot? Like, just do the thing where you try and get round him, put your hands up and try and act like you're not doing anything, almost like hustle his body. So, because Kiefer Moore's a big lad, the ball was in his feet. If the keeper comes out and smothers him, I'd rather that scenario, because either way, if you bring him down, it's going to be a penalty. He's got a better chance of scoring. So I think sometimes it's that like I say, that split second where once he's put his hands on the shoulders, it's game over. Wherever he actually tries to get his arm round him and almost like hook as if he's going round his body, he might have had a better outcome. But listen, it's playoff football. This is do or die. This is Bristol City in the playoffs for the first time since obviously the famous Dean Windass time. So this is massive for them and what it would have meant for that football club. And Rob Dickey, who's been a great servant for them this season and been brilliant for them, unfortunately, just sees that moment and he couldn't help his team. And
just to play devil's advocate on that, when a player is pulled, they usually fall backwards. Am I right?
I was about to say the exact same thing, Don.
So
Thank you.
Contact with consequence, Curtis. Yeah. And I'll remind you of Sheffield Wednesday against Derby County.
Yep, I had that. I did have that scenario when a player that I apparently pulled fell forward. I got a red card for it.
And I stuck up for you as well, mate.
Yeah. No, I get that. But yeah, I think, it's one of those. I think, centre of the goal. He's about to literally take the shot.
There you go. We've spoken about that enough now. We'll never talk about it.
No more devil's advocates.
No. Tom, what have you made of Sunderland's this season? Of course, your former side.
I really liked them up until middle of February when they went to Ellen Road and lost 2-1. And obviously that was two very late goals. Pascal Strout, I recall, came on as a sub and scored from two set pieces to kind of break their hearts. But I do think that was the moment where Sunderland truly knew that they weren't going to be challenging for the top two. I think that made the gap 8, 9, 10 points even. And they didn't deal with it. They're a very, very young group, and it clearly affected their morale, their mentality, and their form just nosedived a little bit. And then once the playoff place was secure, Regis Lebris obviously rotated quite a lot, gave some even younger. I was going to say gave some youngsters, but he's been giving gave some younger youngsters a bit of game time. And I've never seen anything like it, frankly, losing 5 games going into a playoff campaign. I've never seen that before in my life. And yet they found a way in the playoff semi-final. So getting back to your point, I actually really liked what I saw through to that Leeds game. I saw a really dynamic team that could play in different ways, carried a real threat, lots of pace, lots of energy. And they turned up in the big games. So both games against Leeds, both games against Burnley, both games against Sheffield United. They lost a couple of those games, but they turned up and they performed. And, so I do think they're a good team. It was a strange end to the season, but I think beating Coventry the way they did, I think it will give them a lift. And as I said earlier, I think there'll be a lot of focus on those 2 games that they've already had against Sheffield United. And there were a lot more positives for them to take than there were negatives.
It's easy to forget how low expectations were heading into this season. Finishing 16th last season, go through 3 different managers, Tony Mowbray, Mike Dodds as well. So for them to be 1 game away from the Premier League is pretty remarkable, isn't it, Curtis?
It is. And listen, all season we've been saying they've done fantastic. This young group is fantastic, a fantastic group of players. And we've always said we weren't sure whether they could last. The fact that they have lasted, and they've so I looked at it, they were in 4th from end of game week 14 until the end of the season and didn't move. So for them to have sustained that is a massive achievement, let alone the fact that they were flying at the top of the league at one point and they could have got in the top 2. To be in 4th for that sustained period where they were in that no man's land where they weren't going to catch 3rd and they weren't going to be caught by 5th is unbelievable, because like I say, we believed in the team and the abilities of the team. It was the staying power of not only the depth of the squad, but it's a young group. It's untested and you don't know what you're going to get. And even when you're bringing in the likes of Isidore, who's not played Championship, Enzo Lafay, whilst they're excellent players and they're good players, you don't know. Championship's a different league. So sometimes you don't know what to get from them. But I have to hold my hand up. They have been fantastic. The group has managed to roll themselves out week after week. They are a young group, yes. But with that, sometimes there comes lulls in form, but they haven't had too much of that from their players. And yeah, I think until, as Don said, that Leeds game where maybe they lost sight of the top 2, they were very, very solid and very good throughout pretty much all of the season.
How much do you think age comes into it? Just expanding on that, the inexperience. If I go back to the Derby team under Frank Lampard, quite a young team with a few experienced pros, probably similar to the Sunderland one. How much does that have an impact going into the final?
It's difficult because there's 2 sides to it. You have the experienced heads, the old heads, that are talking about everything that they've done and their experiences of it. Whereas sometimes the naivety of a young player that is just excited to get out there and play a game at Wembley, sometimes you leave him to it. There's no point of me giving him my old wives' tales and telling him about, when I lost with West Brom, when I won with Hull. Sometimes the naivety of a young player just excited to get on that pitch, and you get a sense for players as a captain and as you're in the group, you know which players thrive off of these occasions. You know which players maybe need a little bit of a lift for these occasions. So you'll get a feel for it, and you'll be having those little conversations throughout the week rather than just a big conversation on the day. But yeah, there is a side to it where the naivety sometimes rubs off. And when I talk to you about the expectation, there's expectation massively on Sheffield United's shoulders, particularly after blowing it as such with that 3-game week. So the expectation is always Sheffield United. Sunderland can go there. And whilst Sunderland's a massive club and Sunderland fans will want Premier League football, really and truly, as you've already touched on, none of us expected them to be here at the start of the season. As the season's gone on, yes, they've definitely deserved to be here. But at the start of the season, I don't think anyone would have said, right, Sunderland are going to be in 4th and be challenging for the top 2 up until February, March. So fair play to them, and it's just going to be an interesting game. You
got to appreciate that they are the youngest group.
Yeah.
Sheffield United are the 4th youngest because Chris Wilder brought in a whole load of young players. So I think over the course of a 46-game season, it is really important to have a sprinkling of experience with a young group. And they did that. I was critical the season before when their policy was buying sort of 20 years old and under. And I thought, this is bonkers. What are you expecting? So I was really pleased when they brought in the likes of Alan Brown and Chris Mepham. Obviously, they already had Luke O'Nine there and one or two others. So now there's a bit more of a balance. So I think through the 46 games important. But when you get to this stage, and it's cup football, it's a semi-final and it's a final, then I think the age thing is less of a thing in one-off games, really.
Going back to the two legs against Coventry then, Don, what did you make of Sunderland there? Because I thought the game plan in the first leg was just absolutely spot on. The second leg, still pretty good. Coventry weren't carving out chance after chance, were they? So ignoring what happened in the 122nd minute, what did you make of the 90 minutes of the first leg and the 121 minutes of the second leg?
So it's interesting, isn't it? They clearly went there not to lose, and a draw would have been a great result. But actually, it muddled their thinking, the fact that they were actually winning going into the second leg. And I think, honestly, they got a little bit caught between a rock and a hard place in terms of, if we get the next goal, we could kill this tie. Or we did it so well at the CBS Arena, sitting in and hitting them on the break and only having 25, 30% of the ball. Can we do that again? The difference is you're in front of your own fans. And I thought the Sunderland fans at the Stadium of Light, I thought they were excellent because their team were territorially and with possession, their team were being dominated, albeit Coventry weren't really carving out clear opportunities. But I do think Coventry were the team in the second leg that went in knowing exactly what they had to do. And I think that simplified it for them. Whereas I think the fact that Sunderland had that lead, probably unexpectedly, just complicated it. So my point is, it's a very difficult one to judge in reality in terms of performance. What you saw was a lot of resilience. What you saw was a little bit of lady luck smiling on Sunderland. I go back to Haji Wright's opportunity with literally the last kick of normal time to glance a header, which he got horribly wrong. And I've said this actually, it was a dangerous tactic, allowing Coventry so much territory, so much ball, and to whiz in Curtis centre off. How many crosses they were allowed. Now, Dan Ballard was unbelievable. And to coin an old phrase that we used to use when I was playing, he was head on a stick, wasn't he? He headed everything away, literally. If Sunderland allow Sheffield United, Harrison Burrows in particular, to get that amount of quality crosses in, and you've got Kiefer Moore in the middle rather than Haji Wright, they're going to pay a price. So they got the job done, Ryan, is the biggest thing. I probably would say they didn't get the job done the way they pictured it in their dreams, but they got the job done. So I applaud their resilience. And in that second half of extra time, the changes worked a treat. Romain Mundell, who I don't know whether we're going to discuss in this later or not. I personally, I'd start him at Wembley. I think he's got so many tools that could really hurt Sheffield United. But whether it will wait, he might keep him up his sleeve to come in. But when he came on the pitch, Chris Rigg came on, all of a sudden, that second half of extra time, they played the way we know that they can. They were more attacking, more front-footed, put Coventry on the back foot, and ultimately got the winner. So it was a very resilient performance that got the job done, Ryan, and that's how I would describe it.
We have to talk about the Dan Ballard goal. We have to talk about it. Obviously, it comes down as one of the most memorable moments in playoff history. Curtis, where are we ranking it?
It's Curtis Davies-esque. Well, I'm not sure you'd be able to bend over that much, Curtis.
No, not anymore. No, if not, I'd be in that position for another couple of weeks. I wouldn't be able to make the playoff final. No, listen, it's amazing, especially the context of, like I say, of both ties. If it were a slugging match where both teams were, blow for blow, and yes, it was a really tight game in terms of possession and chances and all that, and then this moment happens, it would have been, okay, well, one of them were going to win it. But because Sunderland had been under the cosh pretty much for 180 of those 210 minutes, the the context of it with Ballard's performance in the first leg, his defensive headers, clearances, blocks, everything that he did. Second leg doing the same, and then he deserved that moment. If anyone was going to have that moment, he deserved it, because as an old school defender as such, I love to hear about a defender getting praise for making tackles, for making blocks, for clearing the ball from his box with headers. Too often nowadays, you speak about defenders like, oh yeah, he's excellent on the ball. Yes, that is a thing of modern football. But a defender's job is to defend his box first and foremost. And Dan Ballard did that fantastically. But when the moment comes, another job for a defender is to try and get the under set pieces, try and make yourself difficult to mark. And on the night, he actually jumps too early. He's actually like in the wrong, it's so unorthodox. He's in the wrong position. He kind of jumps that giddy one where it's the last corner. He jumps up, and I don't know how he does it, but he kind of obviously just manipulated his body to kind of, it almost ends up coming off his back shoulder type thing. But ultimately,
I've been calling it a deck chair, Curtis. It's
the deck chair. See, you folded like a deck chair. That's a good one. But but it ends up in the back of the net. And like I say, he deserved that moment. It's an incredible moment for him. But like I say, it's a case of that incredible moment came in a semi-final. So whilst we're talking about playoff moments and all that, like I had one against Blackpool for Birmingham, which I scored a header. We came back in that game, but we didn't end up going through. So it's all good. The emotion around that. It's what can he do in the final? And if he pulls out a performance in the final, that's when, that's going to be a much more special moment than any kind of goal that he did in the semi-final.
It is the most incredible header. As somebody that used to love heading the ball myself, I don't think I've seen a header like that, where a player is doubled over and he can only get one certain point of his head on that ball. Only that little spot is that ball going to find the back of that net, and he found it. And I reckon if you give him that 1 million times, he won't score it again because it was freakish. And Curtis is right. I said at the time, as soon as we let the most incredible noise I think I've ever heard in commentary, we let it breathe. Gary wrapped up, and then the first thing I said was, if ever a man deserved that moment based on his performance, it was him, because he was like a superhero in those two games. But going back to your question, Justin, in terms of playoff moments, I can only think of Troy Deeney's. It's more or less the only in the Championship, and I wasn't at that one, so this one trumps it for me. Really, it was just the most, as I said, the noise from the majority of that stadium. I've never heard a noise like it. And I'm sure you saw the scenes, the stands were going bonkers. So it was an iconic moment, but Curtis is right. He will remember it and enjoy it a lot more if he's a Premier League player next season with Sunderland.
Let's get back onto the game on Saturday, because Sheffield United's playoff record has been well publicised in the lead up to this one. It's something that's got to be overturned if they are to win this game. 9 playoff campaigns without a win, Curtis. The worst record in English football. And so the question I would ask you is, does something like that play on the minds of the players heading into this game?
For me, it wouldn't, no. If it's recent history, if you're talking about over the last maybe 10 years and some of this group have played part in a couple of those defeats, then, it might be a thing that lingers from them and maybe rubs off on the group. But with this group, it's a fresh group and they're ready to go and get themselves to the Premier League. So for me, it shouldn't be a factor. Obviously, Sunderland haven't got the best playoff record themselves either, if you want to go that way as well. But I think, obviously, the question was asked to Chris, and he's felt the pain of it as a Sheffield United fan, as rather than being a manager. So he was pretty simple in the fact that, no, we've got a group that are determined to make their way to the Premier League. They're going to go out there. They're going to give their absolute best. And we believe they can get to the Premier League. And I think that's what it is. Like, obviously, we as pundits, we all like to build up these stats and build up these talking points. But ultimately, records are there to be broken, both good and bad. So yes, it's been a long time since they've won one, but they're definitely in the box seat to try and win this one.
I think those kind of things are more for the fans, because if you're a fan and you've witnessed all of those defeats, then it's going to be on your mind. But as a player, as Curtis said, I don't think they'll be thinking about that in the slightest. And it's not that long ago, Brentford won the playoffs, and I think they had a very similar disastrous record. These kind of runs, they have to end sometime. That's the attitude if you're Sheffield United, isn't it?
Moving on to Sunderland, Don, as someone who knows the club so well, and how much will it mean to the club, to the fans, the city to get back to the Premier League? Obviously coming down last time, it was under a cloud of debt, bad decision making. So how much will it mean to everyone associated with the club?
It's just been the most awful demise, really. And it happened very, very quickly. Back-to-back relegations from the Premier League into League One, and then they got stuck in League One for more years than they care to remember, really. So, having played up there for 3 years, I've played for some big clubs. I've played for all the clubs that I've played for. I've had passionate supporters. Sunderland, it's beyond passion up there in the northeast. It's almost like a religion. You're kind of born into it, and I suppose it's a little bit like Las Vegas. How do you describe Las Vegas? It's hard to put into words, isn't it? For those people that have been trying to describe it to somebody that's never been. Well, that feeling, that religion that they have up in the northeast of England for football, it's really hard to put into words, but it will mean the world to them, even if they only have a year in the Premier League, lose some of their better players or whatever. It will just mean everything to those fans. It's a huge club. It's been in the doldrums, and they're one game away. But Luton had their moment, didn't they? So it can all turn very, 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 very quickly. So yeah, it would just mean the world to them, Justin. I'm sure that there's a lot of prayers being said up in that part of the world.
I presume you're speaking from personal experience there about Vegas, Don.
Yeah, and I still can't find the words.
I was just going to ask, do you think it's more of a team that they can be proud of, considering they've spent such a long time battling debt, bad decision making, terrible transfers, going down to League One? Do you think it's more of a team that they can be proud of as opposed to a team actually getting into the top flight?
And I think they've bought in to the model, and I think there's lots of other clubs now that are going to try and go down that road, and it's the recruitment of young players and the development of academy players. And they've, obviously Patterson in goal, Anthony Patterson. You've got Dan Neal, and you've got others. You've got Tommy Watson. You've got lots of other players that they've developed. And I always feel fans can really identify. You've supported Derby County. You've watched Will Hughes recently come through the Derby Academy, and when he was lighting it up for you in the Championship, you must have felt immense pride that he was one of your own, to coin a cliche. Well, Sunderland have got plenty of them. As I say, I think the fans can really identify with this young group of players, and I think they see them doing them proud week in, week out. And of course, Saturday and getting to the Premier League, that would just be the icing, the cherry on top of the cake.
I think it's a really interesting point as well as to what Don says about buying into the model, buying into what the manager's got to do. Because again, when we all heard about the manager, Reggie Labrie, we were all like, who? But then you research his history, he's known for bringing through young players, getting him into the first team, and then some of those first team players, like Enzo Laffi, have then been sold for big money. Now, this is a massive opportunity for Sunderland, and they're not going to want to let this up regardless. But if Sunderland were to win, yes, they'll get to the Premier League, and then with the wealth that they've got and the fan base, they could have a go at building the squad to stay in the Premier League. More so than, obviously, when we speak about Luton having that one shot at the Premier League. But in terms of, if Sheffield United weren't to go up, you'd still fancy them next year. Whereas if Sunderland weren't to go up, like we spoke about earlier, yes, the model is buying young. But how many of those young players are going to have to sell? Is Chris Rieger going to go? Is Job going to go? Is Dan Neal? Is Trey Hume? There's players all over that team, that Premier League teams, either as future stars or as ready-made to play now. They're going to be hunting and ready to take them. So whilst the model is good for the fact that, yes, you get young recruitment in, you build them up, you either go up with them or you sell them. Once you sell them, you have to start again. And that pattern, as we said, this season has been really unexpected from, if we spoke about on July 31st before a ball had been kicked, what we would have expected from Sunderland. But the fact that they've now done it, to then try and break up this group and then do it again, and this isn't me saying that they're going to lose. Of course, this is all ifs and buts. They haven't lost anything. They might well go up. But that's the worry that whilst Don says about, yes, the model's brilliant, but is it brilliant to then next year potentially get another load in and then get a promotion or get back to this situation again?
I do think, before we move on, they have probably got more sellable assets in that squad than any other Championship club, arguably. And with that in mind, they've already sold Tom Watson. With that in mind, they probably, Curtis, would only have to sell one or two rather than all of them.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I totally understand they don't have to sell them.
Because financially, money in the bank.
Oh, yeah, they've got money. And
right.
The owner's obviously very wealthy, but it's more a case of if you're a player in that changing room, and let's say, obviously, Watson's gone already, yes. But if you're Job and you're really desperate to play, well, Premier League or Bundesliga, if we're led to believe the rumours. Obviously, Ryan's got his Dortmund shirt on there, so relatively believe the rumours, he could go to Dortmund and potentially play in the Champions League.
Yeah.
So if it's a case of Chris Rigg got sold and you don't, by no means am I saying are they going to kick off, because I don't know them as personalities, but there's a level of you that, no, I want to get to the next level and I want to get there now. And then if he says it, then all of a sudden the other one's going to be like, well, no, I want to go as well. And then also it builds a little bit of disillusion for a squad, because you do start to believe, well, hang on, if we are selling X, Y, and Z, how are we going to mount that challenge? And the ones that, like I say, have got sellable potential, they'll all be questioning whether they would want to stay. And that's what I mean more so from it. Not necessarily that Sunderland will have to then go, right, because we've not gone up, we're selling all five of you. But it does have a knock-on effect that agents, everyone's like, well, hang on, if he's sold, you've got to sell him. And yeah, it's just that's just the way it works in football. You look around what's around you, and if you feel that you've been dealt a tough hand, let's say, you sometimes feel, well, hang on, well, I should have the opportunity to go as well.
Yeah, and they might not have to sell, but if Dortmund come along and start waving £40 million at the face,
exactly.
then it's a different story, isn't it?
I would argue even if Sunderland get to the Premier League, I would probably expect Joe Bellingham to go to Dortmund if these rumours are right anyway. So,
but you know, would you not think Job selling him out of the Championship, having had a promotion season, all good, but Job having had a season playing in the Premier League, being able to show what he can do at the top level, and then selling him, would you not think that's a better asset to then sell, whilst also someone that's been able to try and help you stay in the Premier League?
Okay, well, I don't know how much time we got. I don't know how tight we are. I look at Ipswich because I was asked a question about Ipswich Town, and they're going to lose Liam Delap. And then I was asked, well, who else might they lose? And I had a look. Well, actually, I don't think there's any Premier League club out there that, based on that group of players' performance in the Premier League this season, another Premier League club would be going, yeah, we want him, or we want him, or we want him. So
maybe Hutchinson.
Has he done that well to get a Premier League move? I don't think so, if I'm honest with you. You know, Leif Davis is another one. But my point is that Sunderland go to the Premier League, hypothetically, and their players struggle the way the Ipswich group have done. Maybe they're worth less, Curtis. So it's kind of, that's the beauty of a director of football or the people who've got to make those decisions. It's about that balancing act. But I think they're in a strong position, obviously they'll be in a strong position if they get to the Premier League. But even if they don't, I think they'll be able to sell a promotion charge to a lot of those talented youngsters. So they might only lose a couple more. That would be my best guess.
Yeah, I suppose it's how they do in the Premier League, isn't it? Because Liam Delap is now worth 10 times as much as he was this time last year, whereas Leif Davis probably isn't worth as much as he was this time last year. So double-edged sword, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's get back onto the game on Saturday. Yeah. We'll look at who do you think is going to be key for each side. We'll go with who do you think is going to be key for Sunderland, Don?
I've already touched on the forwards. So Dan Ballard obviously is going to have to try and latch on to Kiefer Moore. Now, if I'm Kiefer Moore, I'm going to be trying to latch on to Luke 09, knowing that there's going to be some rib tickling and stuff like that. But I'll take that if I'm Kiefer Moore, to be latched on to Luke 09. So that is that's going to be a massive duel. But I spoke about Sunderland in terms of the firepower, the weaponry, the attributes that particularly Isidore, Mayenda, Mundell possess. Those are attributes that have already hurt that Sheffield United defence, and it probably will be the same defence in terms of Ahmedhodzic and Robinson. And between them, they ran them ragged in those two games based on what I saw. So they'll be putting the fear, or they've got the tools to put the fear of God into those two. So if you're Sheffield United, I think there's a massive reliance on Vinny Souza and Hamza Chowdhury to be coming narrow, really, to try and help those Sheffield United central defenders cope with that threat. Because if you saw Mayenda's goal against Bristol City, if you saw Wilson Isidore, the way he skipped round Ahmedhodzic at the Stadium of Light and fired one in, these are scenarios that, and Curtis will probably have had strikers that he hated playing against because he knew that they had the tools to hurt him. Those two centre-halves will not be forgetting about those forwards and what they've done, and they'd be trying to come up with a plan to nullify them, I think.
And then Curtis, Sheffield United, who's going to be their key player?
Well, I think what Don said there about Vinny Souza and Chowdhury potentially tucking in when they're on the attack with Burrows being so high, I think that's a really valid point. But in terms of the way that Sunderland have set out over the two legs of the Coventry game, I think a big thing would be somebody to unlock the game. Now, by no means do we know what they're going to play, what shape they're going to play. But I think a Callum O'Hare, if he does play, could be a player that, in between those lines, the way that obviously Sunderland are banking up and playing those two banks of four and happy to defend crosses, you get a Callum O'Hare in between just to cause a little bit of a stir where the midfielders don't know whether to stick or twist. The defenders don't know whether to stick or twist. I think that could be something that could help unlock the game. And
think he'll play him, Curtis?
I really don't know because, Tom Cannon hasn't pulled up trees since he's been there, unfortunately, for Sheffield United. He's a great hard worker and will run channels on that. But if there's not the space to run channels or not the space to hustle bustle the Sunderland defence...
I was going to say, Curtis, if Sunderland play the same way as they did in the semi-finals, it'll be suicide playing Cannon, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so that's it. So, and then whereas Tyrese Campbell, again, wants to run in behind, wants to find the spaces, whereas you get a player like Callum O'Hare, that tricky one that just floats around, and especially the way he'll dovetail potentially with a Brooks and a Harmer, I think that could be something that could help unlock the game. Again, I'm not the Sheffield United manager, I don't make a decision, but the form that he's shown, having come off the bench the two games, I think he's an excellent player and could really disturb that middle four, the box of the two centre-halves and the two holding midfielders.
I think, to your point, Ryan, I think if Sunderland try and play the same way as they did against Coventry, I think they'll lose. I do.
That's a hot take.
Kiefer Moore.
Because I alluded to it earlier, Kiefer Moore will destroy them. I think...
You don't think Dan Ballard's going to be doing his deck chair headers again?
I get that. Well, Coventry scored their two goals from crosses, both goals. So as good as Dan Ballard did, he couldn't stop Coventry scoring not once but twice. If Kiefer Moore had been playing for Coventry City in those two games of football, Coventry would be at Wembley. I'm confident. Because Haji Wright, he's not one of those that wants to go in and head the ball into the net. He's just not that way inclined. I think Kiefer Moore has the tools to get on the end of quality crosses and cause Sunderland a world of problems.
Oh, okay. It makes the next question interesting in that case. I'm going to ask you who's going to win. So, looking at Sunderland's game plan aside, Don, starting with you, who's your winner?
Well, my heart obviously says Sunderland. My head says Sheffield United might find a way. I'd love to know. I wish I could be in both training sessions and dressing rooms and look at what tactics, how they're going to both go about it. And then I'd probably try and make a more informed decision. Look, I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to go with Sunderland. Gonna let my heart rule my head. Sunderland, because of those forwards that they've got.
Curtis.
I'll have to go the other way. I'll go Sheffield United. I think, as we say, the tactical side of it, the way they've hung on for 2 legs and then ended up winning the game is fantastic. It'll be interesting to see if they were willing to deploy the same tactics and try and win in extra time, try and win on penalties. And I don't think that's the way to go about it. And I think I think Chris Wilder, his experience as a manager, the players that have played Premier League, played big games, some of them have had Wembley appearances, had joy at Wembley, likes of Harrison Burrows, Gus Harmer, who played at Wembley, but obviously had an unfortunate incident with Coventry, lost. That little bit of know-how of the pitch, and the pitch being so big as well. I think Sheffield United, but again, Sunderland aren't going to lay down. They're going to make it really difficult for them, and on the break they will be a threat. The big thing is cutting out mistakes. When they scored the 2 goals against Sheffield United in the game where they won 2-1, I believe both goals were mistakes. And when they scored the goals against Coventry in the first leg anyway, both goals, in my opinion, were big mistakes. So if Sheffield United could limit mistakes, it stops Sunderland having those big opportunities.
There you go. You've heard it here first, ladies and gents. Don, Curtis, thank you for your time today, lads.
Thank you very much for having us.
Absolute pleasure.
Curtis and Don will be part of Sky Sports' coverage of the playoff final on Saturday. As far as our coverage goes, we'll be at Wembley for the game and then reacting straight off the back of it. So keep an eye on your podcast feeds for that. And we'll have plenty of content on our social media channels throughout the day. So make sure you stay tuned in for that. But we'll be next back on Friday, where Justin and I will be doing our preview of the game and making some blooming predictions. So we look forward to seeing you then for that. But this has been the Second Tier Podcast. I've been Ryan Dilks.
I've been Justin Peach.
And a big thank you for listening.